New Revolution Institute presents Your Call to Active Citizenship. This is Lesson 7, The Importance of Voting and Political Activism, Part 2. This lesson will cover how to get people motivated and to the polls. 2. How to prioritize Christian values in voting. It's the Declaration of American Values. 3. Back to the Future, the divergent paths of America. And 4. Voting, an act that echoes through time. Now here's your teacher, Matt Staver.
How do you get people motivated to go to the polls? Well, first of all, we're not talking about a political party. We're not talking about voting Democrat, Republican, or Independent. I don't think that that is a major motivating factor for some. We're talking about not the agenda of the elephant or the donkey, but the agenda of the lamb. We're talking about our Christian duty. It is our Christian duty to evangelize. It is our Christian duty to be salt and light. And if the salt has lost its savor, the scriptures say, it's worthless and should be thrown out. The scriptures also say in the book of Revelation with regards to the church of Laodicea, that the problem with that particular church was that it was neither hot nor it was cold. It was lukewarm. And being lukewarm, whenever you have something in your mouth, such as lukewarmness, or something that doesn't taste right, you spit it out of your mouth. And that's what the book of Revelation warns the church of Laodicea, that unless you become hot, unless you become consistent with your Christian values, then Jesus is just simply going to spit you out of his mouth, as it were. We need to be motivated not because of a political party. We need to be motivated because of the fact that we are Christians born again, that we are citizens of the United States that are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That as Christians and as believers or people of faith, people from the Jewish tradition and Jewish religion, we have a God to whom we are accountable and to whom we are responsible. We not only have an obligation to God, but we have an obligation to people. The Ten Commandments clearly sets forth that obligation to God in the first part of the Ten Commandments, and the last part, the obligation to people. And Jesus summarized that by saying, love God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. He said that that summarized all of the law. Our love for God and our love for our fellow neighbor should be the motivating factor to get us to the polls. The consequences of not going to the polls and not voting is that others with worldviews that are opposite to ours, in fact, hostile to our worldview, will in fact go to the polls. And they'll elect agents of the state, what should be ministers of justice, to ultimately implement laws and policies that are negative or hostile to our faith and values.
In today's world, there's so many people that don't even get out of the chair and go vote. They complain about what's going on, but we need Christians to get involved and to go to the polling place and to vote for Christians who are running for office.
So we cannot sit on the sideline. We must be engaged at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. As we've already said, voting is a prophetic witness to the community. It's not a political act. It's not a dirty word. It's not only our right, but it's our duty to vote, to elect as representatives men and women who share values that will protect our God-given liberties.
Christians have the obligation, as Christians we have the obligation to vote. We live still in a democracy. And so many people around the world are giving their lives against dictatorships just to have this, to have the right to vote. So it is a tragedy that that as Christians we don't exercise our right to vote in this great democracy.
And if we don't vote, or if we vote the wrong way, we are then allowing agents to represent us to absolutely operate contrary to our values. As we are on Sunday and as we believe on Sunday, we must act and do and carry out on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday throughout the entire week. So how do we prioritize our values? Well, we've presented some of these values prioritized in what we call the Declaration of American Values. The Declaration of American Values begins with looking at candidates, not from a political party, but based upon values. I believe as believers, we cannot be captured by a political party. We cannot be captured by the Republicans, nor can we be captured by the Democrats or the Independents. We must be beholden to values, and the political parties or the candidates and those elected officials must support our values, and that's the only reason why we put them in office.
We've got to get men and women of faith out of the pews on Tuesday. It's good that they're in church on Sunday, but on Tuesday they need to be at the ballot box. And they not only need to be voting, they need to be voting as Christians who happen to be Republicans or happen to be Democrats, not Republicans and Democrats who happen to be Christians. That is, they shouldn't leave the teachings of their faith, our faith, about life, about the dignity of man, about marriage, about reliable standards of right and wrong. They shouldn't leave those things aside like there's some code to be checked and only to be brought out if the weather's bad. So yes, it's imperative that more Christians vote. It's imperative that more Christians vote their Christian values in the voting booth.
Some of the political parties, they take individuals for granted around the times of election. And we must never allow political parties to manipulate or use us. So what we've done in the Declaration of American Values, as we've tried to prioritize how do you make decisions on who to vote for, is we've listed the priority. First of all is the sanctity of human life. If a candidate, at no matter what level, even if the candidate says, but we don't deal with the issue of life at this level, it doesn't make any difference. That candidate, if it doesn't have it right on the issue of life, will not have it right on the issue of the money or the economics of the office. Life ultimately is the foundational right of all rights. Moreover, not only will that candidate be wrong in other areas if they're wrong in the issue of life, that candidate may move from the local level to the state level to the United States level. So every candidate, no matter their position, needs to have it right on life. We cannot vote into office or power, or can allow someone to be voted into office or power who does not respect the sanctity of human life. That is a basic principle. It is an understanding of worldview. And if you don't get it right on the sanctity of life, then your worldview is skewed, it's wrong. And if you're not going to get it right on that basic level, you're not going to get it right in any other level as well. So if there's two candidates, one that respects the sanctity of human life and one that does not, you have to go prioritized with the person who respects the sanctity of human life, irrespective of your party. The next one is marriage and family and also religious freedom. Those and other areas are a priority. You need to respect family. Family as husband and wife, created in the image of God, protecting that family unit. If you don't respect marriage, you're going to be wrong on other issues as well. If you don't understand the importance of why marriage is part of God's natural created order, you're going to get it wrong in every other area. You're going to think that laws can simply evolve, that even though marriage was good through millennia of generations, it's not good now. Same-sex marriage or same-sex civil unions came into world history in the year 2000, not very long ago. And that was in the Netherlands when they adopted same-sex civil unions. So throughout world history, even within the promiscuous nature of the Greek civilization, same-sex marriage was not even adopted or understood to be consistent or permissible then. Same-sex civil unions came into existence in world history only in 2000, and in the United States history only in 2004 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So someone who says that same-sex marriage is okay does a couple of things. First of all, they are contrary to a Judeo-Christian worldview with that creation model with God creating Adam and Eve in his image. And secondly, they're assuming that all other cultures throughout all the millennia of human history are wrong and they didn't get it right. And we're the more evolved and enlightened society that can now change the definition of marriage and thus affect the natural created order. The Declaration of American Values goes through other priorities as well. Obviously, religious liberty. Those three things, life and family and religious liberty, Those are critical. If there is a God, and we believe obviously there is, and it's part of our worldview, then we have a right to be able to worship God. And religious liberty ought to be respected. If you have two candidates and they differ on religious liberty protections, one does not believe it very high priority and one does, it helps to inform you as to who you should vote for. I encourage you to take the Declaration of American Values and use it as a prioritizing list with regards to the candidates with whom you associate or who you will support and vote for at the polls. Now, not every candidate is perfect. In fact, the only perfect candidate would be Jesus Christ himself, and he's not running for elected office. So every candidate is going to have flaws. You're never going to have a perfect candidate, but what you do need to do is make sure that they align with you on core values, and the core values that are non-compromisable are religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family, beginning with life as the first right, family and marriage, and religious freedom. All of those three rights are the very foundation of our rights and liberties that are non-compromisable. Some of the other areas you can give and take a little bit, but they help to prioritize your voting values, so it helps to understand who you should vote for. Now let's look back to the future, sort of the divergent paths of America. There's this scene in Back to the Future where the history actually has two different parallel positions. And it's based upon certain acts of history, where you would have in that particular town of Hill Valley either law and order or chaos and disorder. And it all goes back to a point in history. I believe that in American history, we have those same kinds of divergent paths. We have two different futures for America. We have two different possibilities for what this country will be like. It's like a Back to the Future parallel universe. And the difference depends upon your actions now in history. Will you act to be able to protect our God-given values so that the future of America will be one of peace and law and order, one that protects and respects our God-given liberties? Or will you fail to act, or even worse, be complicit in acting wrong so that the future of America goes down a completely different path?
I think that politics defines everything. The way we live, our taxes, our education, our future, our career, our health care. I think that Christians and evangelical groups have to be involved, because sooner or later, one way or another, they will be the victims, like anybody else, about what's going on in the country. I don't think there is an individual or any group in particular in the United States or anywhere in the world actually that can be separated from the influence, in this case I would say the negative influence of a totalitarian government or a central government. They want to take us to live the way they want us to live. So I don't think that this applies only to Christians. Of course, Christians has to be engaged, has to be involved. They have a very powerful message that they can deliver to. But they will be, as I said before, in one way or another, they will be the victims, like anybody else, if they don't participate.
I believe the future of America depends upon you and me. I believe it depends upon how we will act. We were born and then born again for this time in world history. We can look at all of the adversities that we face in world history, and we can get discouraged and we can be intimidated, but instead I am energized because I have not only 200 plus years of American history, which is good, but as a Christian I have 2,000 years of Christian history, and as a believer in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I have several thousand more years of history with the beginning of the Scriptures and the call of Abraham and the founding of the Israelite nation. And we see, for example, when Pharaoh came up against the people of Israel, God raised up Moses, and today we celebrate Passover. And when the king of Persia came up to annihilate the people of Israel, God raised up Esther for such a time as this, and today we celebrate the Feast of Purim. And when Herod the Great came up against King Jesus to kill him and thus slaughter all the baby boys 2 years old and under, Jesus ultimately was protected, as bad as that situation was, and today we celebrate Christmas. And when Jesus went to the tomb and went into the grave and was put into that tomb, everyone thought it was over, and Satan danced on his grave. But 3 days later, he rose again, and today we celebrate Easter. I've been to the place of Caesarea Philippi in Israel, where Jesus stood at the heart of paganism, where we get Panic, or the god Pan, was worshipped among others. Still in the side of the mountains are the altars that are still engraved in stone, going back to the time of Jesus and before. It was there that the gates of hell were thought to be, where the gates went down to the very place of Hades. And Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" Some say that you're John the Baptist or Elijah or some other prophet. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And flesh and blood, he said, did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So we have the years of history from the scriptures of the Israelite people and from our Christian history, where times were even more difficult and worse than they are now. But God's people stood up through the adverse times, even worse than they are now. And God ultimately was magnified, and God ultimately prevailed, and his people prevailed. So we have a time in history where we have a choice to make a difference into our future. And I encourage you to get involved and to get others involved with you as well. Voting, as a final point, is an act that will echo through history. What you do at the ballot box, or what you do not do when you have an opportunity and a duty to act, will literally echo through history. The people that you appoint as magistrates or ministers of justice at any level ultimately will govern our society. As we've talked about the purpose and the role of government, not only you, but the people that you elect should understand that there is a specific purpose and role of government. That there is a creator God who created you and I in his image and infused us with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that government's sole purpose is to protect those God-given liberties. Wouldn't it be amazing if all of our elected officials operated with that understanding? Well, it could happen, and it happens with your vote. Not only your vote, but you getting another person to vote and understand these values. When you think of your vote, think of what you're doing is echoing for generations and will echo through history.